Today's subject is drawing a pearcam again in Fusion 360, but this time using parametric modeling, which simply means using variables to represent the dimensions of the pearcam in this case, instead of using numbers. And the reason for that, and let's look at an example from your homework assignment. So your homework assignment, your last homework assignment had this drawing to help you identify all the dimensions, and you'll notice that in this case, let's look at the pearcam, that the radius of the big circle is half d. Well, what's d? D is the nominal diameter. It's just that's the name of one dimension, and this radius of this circle is half of that. And so d, if we put that into our drawing, then we could change this pearcam to a different size and change all the dimensions accordingly just by changing one dimension. As opposed to if we used numbers for all of these dimensions, we would have to change each dimension that was affected by changing, for instance, the nominal diameter. All right, so to remember what the dimensions here are, in case you haven't seen the last video, the radius of the big circle is half d, as said, but that means the diameter of the big circle is d, the nominal diameter. The radius of the small circle is quarter d, which means the diameter is half d. And then also this dimension, between the two centers of the two circles, is half d. And so everything is going to, all these three dimensions are going to be based on a dimension d that we'll put in. You'll notice also the thickness of the pearcam is 3/16 of an inch. We're also going to add a square, and so why don't we also give a variable, use a variable to represent the sides of the square. We'll call that s. All right, so when you open up Fusion 360, you should have something that looks like this. I am going to start by identifying the parameters, these variables. So I go to the Modify section. All the way down on this menu is Change Parameters, f of x. Right next to the user parameters is a plus sign. I'm going to click on that to add, and I'm going to add in these variables and their value or an expression that will help calculate their value. So I'm going to start off with d, that's the nominal diameter. And if you recall from the last one, it's 2.0 inches, and that's to make it fit into the automata. So I say OK. All right, so that's wonderful, but if you recall, now we need dimensions for instance, this circle's diameter, this distance between two centers, the thickness, and then the sides of the square hole. So let's start off with, let's call this one D1. So I'm going to click on the plus sign. I'm going to type in D1. We could call it D small, whatever works for you. This is equal to D divided by 2. Okay. And because D was 2, D over 2 is 1. All right. Since the distance between the two holes is also half d, I'm going to call this this diameter of this circle d1. I'm going to call this distance d1. So we don't need another variable for that, but let's make up the two variables, the thickness and the sides of the square hole. So I click on plus. Let's use t for the thickness. That's 3/16 of an inch. And you can see that now that dimension's in there as well. That variable has been identified. One last time, we're going to click on plus. Let's call the sides of the square hole S. Those, I asked you to make them 0.25 inch. Whoops, don't add the inch, my fault. Okay, maybe it didn't like S. Let's call it SQ. That worked, SQ. So maybe S means something and we can't use it. So we'll put an SQ for the name, the sides of the square, and it's 0.25 inch. Okay. All right, so now we have all these values of our pearcam identified. So I'm going to hit OK. I'm now going to draw the pearcam, but again, I'm going to draw it differently than I did before by using these variables. So I right click, sketch. If I hover over sketch, or maybe I need to click it, then I click center diameter circle. It's asking me which plane to put it in. I click on a plane. I then find this origin and I click on that for the center of my circle. I click and drag. Instead of now typing in a value like 2.0 inches, I'm going to hit D. And you can see it brings me up anything that has a D in it. I click on user parameter, enter, and now I've used that variable to measure, to specify the dimension of that circle. All right, let's draw another circle. You'll notice I'm not going to click finish sketch. Sketch, so I right clicked, hovered over sketch. Now I'm hovering over center diameter circle and I click. All right, I'm going to click over here for the center and drag. Again, I'm not going to type in a specific dimension like 1 inch. I'm going to click D, but this time D1. Enter. That's equal to D over 2 or 2 over 2 or 1 inch. All right, so now we're going to align the two centers by using a constraint. We're going to use this one, horizontal vertical constraint. It needs to know what's being constrained, so I'm going to click on the two centers of the two circles. Click, click. Now you can see they're aligned. I want these two centers to be specified by a dimension D1 again, which is equal to D over 2. I'm going to come up here and click on the dimension tool. It needs to know what's being dimensioned, so I'm going to click on the center of this circle, the center of this circle, and drag. I click to place, but again, this time I'm not going to type in a value. I'm going to click D. It identifies these two having D in it. It's D1 that I want, D over 2. Enter. And as you can see, it's 1 inch, 2 over 1. So I've used D's, D and D1, to identify all these measurements so far. All right, I'm going to continue on by doing what we did earlier, putting in lines and using constraints. So sketch, line, I'm going to draw it randomly. A line over here as well. Okay, now we're going to constrain them. So we're going to come up here and find the tangent constraint. We want this side of the line tangent with this circle. You can see the tangent constraint is visible. We want this side of the line tangent with this circle. Whoops, that didn't work. See, I didn't get the tangent constraint, so I know that I didn't do it. So it's a little hard here. You know, I have to go past the halfway point. So just make sure you're still on the line and then on the circle. All right, so what we'll do is we'll just zoom in a little further to make this easier. So this end of the line. All right, and it looked like it just made it constrained. Okay. So that's sometimes what you need to do. You need to zoom in more to get the exact, so that you click on the exactly where you need to. All right, we're going to continue to constrain. We're going to make this end of the line tangent with this circle. Let's do the same thing. Let's zoom in here and make this end of the line tangent with this circle. All right. So the last thing we have to do, and you'll notice I still have not clicked Finish Sketch, is to trim away. So we're going to trim away this part of the circle, the top circle, this part of the top circle, this part of the top circle. This is a diameter measurement. It's not actually part of the circle. This part of the bottom circle. All right, so now we've trimmed away everything. Now we can finish sketch. All right, so now we're going to extrude. So I'm going to click on the object, click on extrude. Let's click on the little house so we can actually see in 3 dimensions. It wants us to pull on the arrow. All right, so here, where it's specifying the distance that I'm extruding, again, I'm not going to type in a exact value. I'm going to type in a variable t that I've already identified. Be careful. I don't think you want the inches in there. And then hit OK. So now it's extruded to t inches or 3/16 of an inch. All right, the last thing we're going to do is we're going to make another drawing of the hole. I clicked on the front face. I'm going to right click on sketch. I'm going to make a center point circle, so I don't want that. So that was my fault. Let me replace that. Let's click on create. We're going to make okay, so one problem with this, as before, if you're trying to draw and you don't see the squares you want, it's because you are not in the right place. So there we go. Whoops, still not there. All right, let's go into sketch 2. Let's edit sketch. There we go. Now we can see the rectangle options. I'm going to choose center rectangle. I'm going to focus my, I'm going to put my center of my rectangle at the origin. I'm going to click and drag. Okay, so now it's asking me for dimensions. I'm not typing in 0.25. I'm going to type in SQ for square. It shows up. I click on it. And now wants the other side, the dimension. So I need to, let's do that again. Let's type in SQ. Square. Now let's tab to the next dimension. SQ. Click on square, enter. And now we should have a square of 0.25. See, as you can see, I'm going to click Finish Sketch. I'm going to rotate so that I can see it. It looks like my square is on the back surface. So I'm just going to rotate this. Excuse me. Just zoom in a little. Okay, I'm going to click on the object I want to extrude. Good. Now I'm going to click on the extrude up here in the upper left corner. I'm going to pull in this direction. But this time, again, instead of putting in a dimension, a distance dimension here in the extrude window, I'm going to type in T, the thickness. And you can see it does say cut, and then click OK. Thank you for listening. We now did this with parametric modeling. We did it with variables instead of with actual dimensions. If now you decided, in a project, for instance, you're involved in that, you need a different dimension, you go to your modify toolbox here, you go to change parameters, and you change the dimension you want changed. So for instance, we can click on this 2-inch dimension of the nominal diameter. I'm changing it to 3 inches. I say OK, and maybe it was hard to tell, but your whole pearcam now grew. Everything that was dependent on that nominal diameter D has now been changed, all in one variable change. Thank you for listening.